Howdy. Howdy, students of Humanities 4, Shasta College Film Studies. Here we are. It's February. And in about 4 days, the sun might attempt to come out. I, for one, kind of missing it. Today, hope you guys had an interesting weekend. I know you're all probably working feverishly on your essays. Haven't had too many questions. I've seen some of you have turned them in. I'll start grading them this week. And when I make my comments on your grades, do pay attention. I know it's the first essay. I go pretty easy on it. The more we get into the class, the more I expect of you and your essays, and I get a little more critical on the grading. But what I'm looking for, I think I explained pretty good in the announcements and in the assignment. I'm looking for you to analyze the film, not review it, not tell me if you like it or you dislike it, or give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Analyze. Why is it? Why does it work? Why doesn't it work, in your opinion, of course? But also, you got to put yourself back in that 1927 in a movie theater. You're seeing it for the first time, and try to take your 2021 eyes off of it. You don't know what color is. You have no idea what sound is. So why would you bring it up in an essay? If you're writing an essay or about that film when it came out, how would you write it? You wouldn't be able to look at it in retrospect. It would be cutting edge film. What did you see? What were the themes? What was the performances like? What was the direction like? I know you might even not know what a director does, but you know what a scene looks like. You've seen movies before. The point is not to compare it to contemporary movies. Do your best not to do that. It's unfair. There's no point to it. Look at the film. Let it stand on its own. First time Academy Award winning film. The woman won an Academy Award, the very first one. Wasn't even a big party when they presented it to her. Not like the big extravaganza they do now. The film is important, and I assigned a lot of times I assign shorter films like comedies by Chaplin and stuff, but I wanted to challenge you guys a little. Look at something serious that came out of that era and see how serious filmmaking is, and what were they trying to attempt? Were they successful? Like I tell you before, the human element doesn't ever change. Our stories are always the same. We always want what we want. We always desire what we desire. We always win or lose or fail. How we deal with it, that hasn't changed since the beginning of man. Only thing has changed is the technology to depict that. Early days, it was hieroglyphics on the wall, cave paintings, and then was painting, and then was writing. When people learned how to read and have language, then it was theater, where audiences came. And then they invented the movie camera and everything changed. And so that's what this course is about. The importance of film art on our collective culture. Not just us, but everywhere in the world. Americans just had more access in the early going on. But things have changed, definitely, and I'll get into that much later on in the course. But today I want to talk about, we're coming out of the 1920s. Last week we're in the 20s, and that's what that film represents. There was, to give you historical context, and this is This is going to be covered in your quiz, so you should pay attention. The context is during the 1920s, we came out of World War I. We survived it, folks. We lost a lot of guys. The world lost a lot of guys. We thought we survived the war. Let the party begin. And right when the party was supposed to get going, they made liquor illegal. Not a great move on their part. But for 10 years, it was illegal and impossible to buy liquor anywhere except for illegally. But that didn't stop people. You're not going to stop people from drinking, period. Impossible. And women got the right to vote in about 1919. And so the women wanted their fair share of the enjoyment out of life. They didn't want to sit home anymore and take care of the kids. They wanted to go out and enjoy their young lives. And so thus started the Roaring '20s and the flapper culture with the fashions and the haircuts from women. They cut all their long hair off. That was going back to the Victorian era, age of style. They wanted to be free. They started smoking cigarettes. They started having relationships with men out of marriage. And the Catholic Church didn't like that at all. And a good time was had by all. Now, what happened also in this time of era, and I'm going to have you look at a short documentary. There was, if you look at old films, like the one you looked at, you might be surprised that it's very adult material. It could deal with not just, when I say adult, I'm not talking about just sexual material. I'm talking about emotional material. Jealousy, murder, revenge, depression, suicide, and throw some sex in, and there you have it. That's what I'm talking about, emotionally grown-up material. And these films embrace those themes. That's what I'm talking about when I say theme. It's just, the theme just isn't love. That could be a part of your movie, but what's deeper than that? Unrequited love? Yes. The love you can't have, the forbidden love? Absolutely. It's all wrapped up in these movies. And a lot of it's in that movie that I ask you to watch. Hope you've seen it. Hope you got through it. Still got another couple days on essay, so don't worry about it yet. It's due, I think, at midnight. I think I signed it last Wednesday, so it's due this Wednesday. Now, I'm keeping it open until Friday, but you will be marked down for being late. And then after Friday, forget about it. Don't hand it in. You'll just lose the 10 points. I don't want anybody to email it to me because it gets lost in the shuffle, and you'll lose so many points, it won't even be worth writing it. So you have an extra couple days, yes, until Friday, but you will lose points because it'll be late. Anything after this Wednesday is late. So look at your due dates. Really pay attention. I'm getting some texts that people are looking at things and they're kind of shocked that when things are due, when things aren't due. It's all there in Canvas. It's all mapped out. You've got to check announcements every day. You got to look at assignments and discussions, and they all have due dates, and they all have expiration dates. The discussions usually go for a week, and then it's shut down. It's over. No need handing me a discussion after it's over. Okay, you missed it. That means you missed a week of not looking at Canvas. We're in class, folks. You got to look at this stuff. I know we have lives, we all have jobs, but you are in college. And so please look at the announcements on Canvas, watch the documentaries, watch the movies, and participate. That's what we're here for. Okay, so now we're in the 19, I'm not going to talk about it today. I'm going to talk about it in depth more on our next lecture. What happened with what they call pre-code movies and movies. There was a code of ethics. I'm not going to talk about it too much right now because it's a lot of information. But let's put this say the Catholic Church was very, very influential in everybody's lives 100 years ago. Not so much anymore, but it still has a lot of power. And they weren't happy with what they were seeing in some films. Yes, you could see nudity by women, of course, because sex sells, folks, but only to heterosexual audiences, evidently. You were seeing drug addiction. Yes, not they were doing, they would smoke morphine or smoke opium in a scene. That was considered pretty adult and risque. They're showing people drinking and smoking and the suggestion. They don't show sex, folks, but they show a suggestion that these people are going to have sexual relations. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about adult content. And the Catholic Church was not happy the way they felt movies are going in this immoral way. And then there was an episode. There was an episode that changed everything by a very prominent movie star, director, personality by the name of Fatty Arbuckle. So I'm going to have you guys look at a documentary on Fatty. I'm going to sign it. Look for it in modules. You'll see what I'm talking about, and then I'll talk about it further. Possibly we'll may have a discussion on it. But let's put it this way: Fatty Arbuckle loved to party. He was at one time the highest paid performer in Hollywood. He was a very rotund comedian, beloved by everybody. His movies made a boatload of money. He had $1 million a year contract. That's pretty big, folks, for 1918. And he was influential with silent comedies. He played a very childlike simpleton. And because he was so fat, it was funny. And his pratfalls and his shenanigans were funnier because he was so fat. And that made it even more funny. If you could compare it to somebody right now, look at Chris Farley or John Belushi. Not that Belushi was that fat, but he was a chubby comedian that was popular. Look at John Candy. We love him. All these guys are dead early because, well, essentially John Candy ate himself to death, had a heart attack at 43 years old. Chain smoker, 350-pound guy, genius of a comedian, in my opinion. Chris Farley, I appreciate drug overdose at 33, eating himself to death. John Belushi, same way, drug overdose at 33. They lived hard, they lived fast, and they were fat guys. I hate to use that word fat, but his name was Fatty Arbuckle. And we loved it because we love laughing at their expense. Look at the fat guy, how funny he is. Well, there's a lot of sadness in that too. There's a lot of pathos in that persona, a lot of pain. That goes along with that. This is long before we had social networking, social platforms, body shaming everybody. These guys took that body shame and they turned it on its head and they made a career out of it. Melissa McCarthy would be a great example of a heavy-set woman who's now she's losing all this weight. We'll see how funny she is, because being a fat actress, a funny one, can only last so long. We'll see how she does. She's lost a lot of weight. I'm glad she's done it for her health. Rebels lost a bunch of weight. You know who that is? Can't think of her last name. Anyway, because it's essentially not healthy to be that overweight, but they used it. Rebel Wilson, you know who I'm talking about. They used it to their advantage. Now they're going to be just as funny. They'll be just as funny, but will we laugh at them as much because they're now just like regular people that look like, you know, they have Pilates teachers and trainers, which they do, folks. Fatty started all that. Fatty Arbuckle. But Fatty liked to party. And I guess I'm talking about it now. I wasn't going to, but maybe I'll talk about that now. Because it's real important because it changed everything. After this incident with Fatty Arbuckle, he was smart enough to know that this was long before we had social platforms and everybody was texting about everything. But they did have gossip columnists in LA, and they kind of knew he liked to party and he wanted to escape that. And so how folks used to escape it in the early days was to go to San Francisco to party. They drove up the coast, which is a long drive in 1922 in those old cars. It's not a short drive now, but it takes you 6 or 7 hours, 8 hours maybe, if you're in a bad day. And in those days, it probably took twice that amount, or you flew up here, flew to San Francisco, or took the train, which was popular. And you could party out of the public eye, and the gossip columns wouldn't have any coverage there, and they didn't know where you were. And so you could actually escape the paparazzi, which is for the photographers that take everybody's picture down in Hollywood and follow their every move. They stalk them. You know what I'm talking about. We'll talk about that. There'll be a whole other lecture later. So here's poor Fatty. He goes to San Francisco to party, and he's having a good time in a hotel down there, and he gets lots of ladies to come up to the room because they all know he's there, and he promises. What does he promise them, folks? Come to Hollywood. I'll put you in a movie. You know, but there's things they have to do that. It's called the casting couch, folks. And so it's a room full of people. They're all having a good time. They have nice illegal booze. There's prohibition still. And so a woman showed up, and during the night, as the party continued, they kind of disappeared together. And she lets out a huge scream during the night. They all come running, and they find her bleeding on a bed. They call the paramedics, and the rumor started that he had sodomized her, folks. I hope you know what that means. Look it up if you don't. It means penetration through not the vagina. Let's put it that way, folks. And he penetrated supposedly this woman with it's been said, a Coca-Cola bottle or a champagne bottle, and he penetrated her through her. That's right, folks, her anus. And supposedly it perforated her intestine, and she bled to death. Other rumors had it that just by simply laying on top of her to have sex, it once again smothered her and his overly zealous body weight and perforated her intestines, and she bled to death because he laid on top of her with the big weight. He was charged with murder, second-degree murder. He had to stand trial. You watch the documentary, you'll see him talking about. His career was over. People believed it. They wanted to believe it because we like to believe bad things about the celebrities. Catholic Church was in an uproar to get things changed. And they found out later that she did not die of those things. She had just that morning, folks, an abortion. And if you can imagine having an abortion in the 1920s, it's illegal. It's in the back room, as they used to say, the back room. probably not even by a real surgeon or doctor. And supposedly, uh, she had issues with, and that's what killed her. Well, I don't know about you folks, but you must want to party a lot. It says I gotta wait a second here. It says my internet's disconnected somehow. Hang on. No, it's there. I'm there. Is it okay? Am I coming in? It said I was disconnected, but it looks like it's okay. You've got to really want to party a lot, folks, if you have an abortion in the morning and go party like it's crazy 8 hours later. She was a known prostitute, showgirl who wanted into Hollywood. This is how we do it, folks. Did it in those days. So he was held on trial. The first trial was mistrial, hung jury. They tried him again because the prosecutor was a politician and he wanted to run for mayor or governor. I can't remember which. And so he had a hot case here, publicity. If they can convict this wealthy movie star who had these bad, immoral parties, his political career would look pretty sharp. Well, as the trial went on and they got all the witnesses in there, they found out the truth. And he didn't actually do any of that stuff. Yes, he was there when it happened. So he's found not guilty, but by then his career was in shambles. Nobody wanted to hire him. He couldn't get work anymore, and he kind of died in tragic circumstances later. Watch the documentary, and we'll talk about it next time I see you guys on Wednesday. Anyway, in the meantime, they started, Catholic Church says, we're not going to support, we're going to boycott movies. You better clean up your act. And then we had a censorship put in. It's called the Hayes Commission, and I will talk about that later. But during all that, the 1930s were happening. Yes, now booze was once again legal. You didn't have to buy illegal booze. You could buy it in the store in the bars like old days. And it gave rise to gangsters. And that's where gangsters actually came from, was bootleggers, people who sold booze and got booze and dealt with booze in an illegal way. And then the rise of gangsters in the 1920s was huge. And it wasn't what we call the mafia. It wasn't Italian mob yet. That comes in later. It was a lot of people, Irish, all sorts of nationalities, and Italian. They came out of Chicago, New York, and big cities, and they became very flamboyant. And there was a lot of crime. And the FBI went after these guys. Maybe you've seen the movie Untouchables. That's what that's all about. There used to be a series called The Untouchables also. FBI went after these gangsters who were illegal bootleggers, but they also killed people who got in their way. So they were bad, bad dudes. But the public was fascinated by them. So when I'm asking these questions in your quiz about the influences of the public influences on Hollywood and vice versa, well, here's one right now. The rise of gangsterism and the rise of gangster films in the 1930s was due to the fact that the public was insatiable. They wanted to know about these things. They wanted to see stories. And so Hollywood did what the public wanted. They showed stories about gangsters. And there was made careers out of some people. James Cagney was one of them. He did his legendary Public Enemy. Edward G. Robinson was another one. They came and they did gangster movies. And then there was the original Scarface, the Roaring Twenties. And they were very, very popular in the 1930s, these movies, during the Depression. Well, yes, booze is free, but now we're in a depression. Wall Street has crashed, and people are out of work like never before. Hollywood didn't know what to do. How do we keep getting their money? Well, they figured it out. Give them gangster movies. That was one of them. That's another genre that they gave them. And they were very, very popular movies. Give them monster movies. And I don't mean horror movies, but monster movies. With monsters like Dracula, Werewolf, The Mummy, Frankenstein's monster, that's what he was called, folks, not Frankenstein. Frankenstein is the doctor who created the monster. The Bride of Frankenstein, there's another one. These were hugely critically popular, easy to film, low budget movies that were coming out of Hollywood. What gave rise to that was one thing, is attributed to the rise of Nazism in the early 1930s in Europe. Nazis were starting to get into power in Europe. And we didn't know, the world didn't know how to combat that. The monsters, Hitler and Mussolini and the rest, were starting to rear their ugly monster-like heads into the public eye, but we had no way to fight it yet. So how did we fight that? Well, through monster movies. We could fight Dracula. We could fight the werewolf, shoot him with a silver bullet, no problem. Put a stake through his heart, but we couldn't shoot Hitler with a silver bullet. We couldn't put a stake through Mussolini's heart yet. Same thing with, gave rise to the comic books. In the first Superman, folks, the first Superman comic, action comic, came out in the late 30s. Guess what? He wasn't fighting Lex Luthor. He was fighting a Nazism. He went to war with Nazis. Wonder Woman came about a year later, and she was fighting Nazis. All of a sudden, you could fight Nazis in comic books, but we weren't going to fight them in real life yet. So these monster movies were popular because we could defeat Frankenstein's monster. We could defeat Dracula. We couldn't defeat Hitler yet. And that's another genre. Another genre that popped up was dance movies, with musicals, with Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, and all his other partners. Gene Kelly came a little later. He got more popular later in the 40s and 50s. Fred Astaire owned the 30s, and people loved to see elegance during this depression. They wanted to see fantasy fairy tale like movies of Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire dancing their love affair, or what, they weren't having, and then they showed them having sex, folks. They showed them dancing, which was as good as sex. And people could go into the movie and escape their lives for a few hours. It cost them a nickel or a dime, not much more than that. And they could maybe if they could afford popcorn, they could. And they could sit in there and look at this fairy tale that Hollywood produced. And these are incredible musicals with dancing. And that was hugely popular during the Depression. People wanted to escape the reality of what was going on outside the movie theater, which was long lines for food, can't pay your rent, no jobs. People were hurting. Hollywood came to their rescue, but also came for their meager funds that they had. They didn't give these movies away for free, folks. The fourth genre that became hugely popular and became known as drawing a blank now. Why am I doing this? You think I'd write these things down? Screwball comedies. We would call them rom-coms now, romantic comedies, but in the day they were called screwball comedies. Now there's a reason for that. They were pretty wacky, very fairy tale like, not going to really happen in real life. And they usually took place in high society in New York City, Chicago, with fancy people, wealthy people who the Depression didn't have an effect with. And they came off silly. They usually showed their comeuppance in these movies, like so many of them, like My Man Goffrey, Philadelphia Story, Ringing Up Baby. These rich people look silly. It was fun to laugh at them. Why should they get all the money? Well, we have nothing. So they started. One of the earliest ones was called "It Happened One Night" with Clark Gable, Claudette Colbert. It's about a hardworking reporter who accidentally runs into an heiress. Who can I compare to now? Kardashians or Paris Hilton, if you remember her. She's a spoiled rich girl, and she's running away from everything, and he discovers her, and he sees the story of the century in her. And of course, during their travels across the country, they fall in love, folks. They start off hating each other, and they end up loving each other. And the moral of the story is she marries the right guy and not the wrong guy. And he's prejudiced against wealthy snob. He hates these wealthy women who act like they're kings and queens. And he didn't, but he fell in love with one. It set the template for rom-coms to this day. So that was a cutting-edge, revolutionary film made by Frank Capra. Beautiful black and white. Talkies, by the way, were out of the silent era. I'll talk more about that transition on our next lecture, how we came out of the silent era and how that affected our lives. And I'll sign, guys, I want you to watch the disc 2 on the story of film because it deals with that, story of film. I'll sign that. I'll set it up. It's on Canopy. Hopefully you saw part 1. I know one last thing here, then I'll shut up. I know a lot of you don't have the textbooks yet, either one of them, and that's all right. You're letting me know you don't have them, but I think they're on the way, so I'm not going to sign any readings. Only thing that's really helpful is the one little smaller book, How to Write About Movies. That does help your essays, and I will go over more in detail on that on the next lecture. And I'll put some helpful hints up on the internet, or the Canvas, I should say. So other than that, keep working hard, keep up in your journals. And I've had some questions about handing them in. Handwritten. Folks, we're not in class. Nobody's going to hand me anything. That's all going to be uploaded onto Canvas. But you can't do it now because I haven't put it out there yet. I don't want you to do it now. It's not going to be handed into the very last week of this semester, which is in middle of May, I think. That's when I'll post it. But you should be typing it up every week and storing it on a Word doc, some kind of doc. So, and then when time comes, you'll upload those nicely neat typewritten pages. I will also put some examples in announcements. Don't worry about it. Just keep up on it. Make notes. Pay attention. Then you'll be okay. Other than that, you know how to get a hold of me. Hope you're watching these movies. Hope you're getting some enjoyment out of it and some knowledge out of it. Because at the end of the day, everything is cinema.